and that you had an amazing day. All right, so for today's lesson, our grade one English lesson, we'll be doing adjectives that compare. We'll be doing adjectives that compare. So before we start, you're going to log in to the aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged into aplusstudents.ca, you're going to log in with your username as well as your password. Once you've logged in with your username as well as your password, and then you're going to select the subject of language arts and then grade 1. So we are doing adjective that compares, so which means that we are going to scroll down to the chapter of adjectives that compare. So in our previous lesson, we did adjectives as well as prepositions. So in today's lesson, our focus or chapter that we will be focusing on is adjectives that compare. All right, so within the chapter of adjectives that compare, the lessons that we will be focusing on today is compare pictures using comparative as well as superlative adjectives. We're going to identify comparative and superlative adjectives. And then, does the adjective compare to or more than to, right? So we basically need to know what comparative is and what superlative is. All right, so let's go to our first lesson, which is compare pictures using comparative and superlative adjectives. All right, so some adjectives that compare people, animals, or let's say some adjectives they compare people, animals, places, or things, right? Then we have comparative adjectives and then we have superlative adjectives, right? So firstly, what you need to remember is that we do have adjectives that compare people, or they compare animals, or compare places or things, right? And the two different types of adjectives that we're going to be focusing on is comparative adjectives and superlative adjectives, right? So comparative adjectives, right? It compares two people, animals, places, or things. So only two, right? It's comparing yourself to Jane, or comparing yourself to John, or comparing yourself to something else, comparing the one tree to the other tree, comparing the dog to the cat, for example, right? Comparing two places. So that is comparative adjectives, right? It is where you're comparing something to a different thing. So it's only comparing two people, two animals, two places, or two things, right? And whenever you compare two things, which is two people, animal, places, or things, our we basically end let's say our word within, or let's say our adjective, we will end in er, right? So if you, for example, say Andy is taller than his sister, and then taller is the adjective that compare, right? And as you can see, the word is tall. However, the er that is added to the word tall, it shows that it is a comparative adjective that is comparing two people within this sentence now. So Andy is being compared to his sister, which means that Andy is taller than his sister, right? So as you can see is the two people, or let's say the two siblings, are now being compared in height, right? Which means that the one is taller than the other, right? So if the one is taller than the other, then we can say, so if Andy is taller than his sister, then we can say his sister is shorter than him, right? Because now we know we're talking about Andy. But as you can see, is this is also a form of comparison, right? And there we have shorter, er, right, which shows the comparison between two siblings or two people in this case. All right, so basically comparative adjectives, it compares to people, or it compares to animals, or it compares to places, or it compares to things, right? And we say that comparative adjectives, right, the adjective ends in er because now we are comparing it to one another, right, or to each other. So that is a comparative adjective, right? But now we also have superlative adjectives. Superlative adjectives. And superlative adjectives, it compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, right? So which means that superlative adjectives, it compares someone to the whole class, for example. So you would maybe say that if you were to compare yourself to the rest of the class, you can then say that I am the smartest in class, right? Which means that you are not just comparing yourself to one person, you're comparing yourself to the whole class, right? Or you're comparing yourself to a group of friends. Um, I am the tallest person in the class, or I am the smartest out of my friends or my two friends that I have, right? Which means that you are, or it is being compared now to more than two people, usually a bigger group, right? So superlative adjectives, it compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, right? It is like comparing the lion to literally all of the animals in the jungle, right? Where we can say that he is the strongest, um, let's say, animal in the jungle, right? Which means that that is a superlative adjective because we basically just compared him, which is the lion, to all of the animals within the jungle, right? And if we look at an example, if we look at the pictures that we see in front of us, right, there's four, let's say, people within the picture. It says, he is the tallest person in class, right? Which means that if we are comparing people, animals, or places to more than two things or two people, animals, or places, then it means that our adjective is going to end in est. So now adjective is going to end in est. Remember, we said comparative adjective, right? It compares two people, two animals, two places, or two things, right? And the adjective, it ends in er, right? For example, taller. However, with superlative, right, that compares more than two people, places, things, or animals, it ends, or let's say the adjective, it ends in est, right? And here we have an example. He is the tallest person in his class. So he is the tallest person in his class, which means that he is now being compared to everybody else in the class. So he is the tallest. We can't say he's a taller person in class. We can't say he is the tall person in class. No, Remember, we are comparing him, and that is why we call it adjectives that compare. And if we compare him to everybody else in class, then our adjective, it ends in est. For example, he is the tallest person in his class. So once again, comparative adjective, it compares two people, animals, places, or thing, and the adjective ends in er. For example, taller. And then we have a superlative adjective that compares more than two people, places, animals, or things, and they end, or let's say the adjective, it ends in est. For example, tallest, right? So it's the same as saying, I am tall, right? Andy is taller, right? But we can say Jack is the tallest, right? So I am tall, right? So compared to certain people, if you were to measure yourself in height compared to maybe your friend or whoever, then maybe you are tall, right? But now if you compare yourself to another person, you can say Andy is taller than me, right? Because now you're comparing Andy to you in height, right? But now we're saying Jack is the tallest, right? So he is the tallest when it's compared to all of us, or the tallest in class or out of the group, right? So as you can see, here we have the degrees of comparison. There we have tall, taller, which is ER, and tallest, which is EST, right? And these are the degrees that shows the different comparisons, right? Taller, that ends in ER, it shows a comparative adjective that compares two people, animals, places, or things. And tallest, which is EST, right? It is a superlative adjective that compares more than two people, animals, places, or things. All right, so now we are moving along. Okay, so now they want to know which one is higher, right? Which one is higher? All right, so they want to know which one is higher. If we look at the pictures, right? If we look at the two pictures, here we have a hot air balloon, right? You have a hot air balloon, and now we need to say which one is higher within the pictures, right? So you need to identify and look at both pictures, and then you need to say which one is higher. And if we look at the position of height compared to the pictures or whatever we see within the picture, right, then we can say the top one, right, it's already like, if you from basically from where you're standing, it is literally in the sky, right? You can see it as high as the clouds. However, the bottom one, it is literally still on land, right? Because there we can see it's only as high as the trees, right? But not as high as the sky, which means that the top one is higher, right? Which means that the bottom one is lower, right? So as you can see, it is now being compared to one another, right? So the one is higher and the other one is lower. And this is a comparative adjective. Which one is fatter? They want to know which chicken is fatter. if we look at the two chickens, right, the brown one and the gray one, we need to say which one is fatter. All right, so if we look at the two pictures, right, then we can say the top picture or the top chicken is more fatter than the one at the bottom, right? Which is, so the brown one is more fatter than the gray one, right? Which means that the gray one is thinner than the brown chicken. And as you can see, that is comparing the two animals to each other, right? That is why we call it comparative. And it ends in ER. Fatter, and he is thinner. Which man is faster? We need to say which man is faster. So if we look at the two pictures of the men riding the bicycle, right? And we look at the position of where they are in distance from each other, right? Then we can say, oh, we need to compare the one on the bicycle compared to the man that is walking, right? So if we need to compare the man walking to the one riding a bicycle, then we can say that the one riding the bicycle is faster than the man that is walking, which means that the man that is walking, he is slower than the one riding the bicycle. And as you can see, we are now comparing these two men when it comes to speed, right? And of course, someone riding a bicycle is going to be a bit faster than someone walking, right? Which means that someone walking is going to be slower than the one riding the bicycle. All right, so now let's do a test, right? So we're going to do a test where we compare pictures using either comparative or superlative adjectives, right? So we're going to identify which one is smaller, right? So we need to say which one is smaller. Is it the option one, which is the purple um, car, or is it the orange truck? So we need to say which one is smaller, a smaller car. So if we look at both of these pictures, right, of cars or things, then we can say the top one is smaller than the big truck. And we can even look at the wheels, right? The more wheels a vehicle has, right, the bigger it is. So we can say the purple car or bakkie is smaller than the orange truck. So if you have that, then well done. Which one is fatter? We are comparing the two chickens to one another, the brown chicken as well as the gray chicken. We need to identify which one is fatter. Is it the brown chicken or the gray chicken? We need to say which one is fatter. And if we even look at both of these chickens in size, then we can say the top one, which is the brown one, is more fatter than the gray one. All right, so now we are going to compare these two animals, right? Or let's say these two cats, because a lion is also a form of a cat. So these two cats in sound, right? So, or who is the loudest or so on. So which one is louder, right? So which one is louder? So it's either the cat, right? The small kitty cat, right? That is your pet. Or is it the lion? This big lion that is in the jungle. We need to say which one is louder? So is it the cat, which is the kitty cat, your pet at home, or the lion, the king of the jungle, right? That roars. So if we were to select which one is louder, then we can say it is the lion, right? So the lion is more louder in its roar, in its sound, right? Compared to a cat that just meows. All right. Which one is smaller? We need to compare the two birds, right? We have little bird and then we have, I think it's either an eagle or bird, right? So we need to look at the two birds in size and we need to say which one is smaller, right? And we can literally even see which one is smaller, right? The cute little purple bird with its beautiful purple and blue colors, right? Compared to the big gray bird. So we're going to choose the small purple bird. He is smaller than the big gray bird, which means that the gray bird is bigger than the other bird. All right, so well done if you have that, right? Let's go back. All right, so now we basically compared pictures by using comparative and by using superlative adjectives, right? And we said that a comparative adjective, it compares two people, places, animals, or thing, right? And a comparative adjective, it ends in er. Then we have superlative adjective, right? And the superlative adjective, it compares two or more. So which means that it compares more than two people, places, animals, or thing. And the superlative adjective, it ends in est, right? That is the difference between comparative adjective and superlative adjective. Now we're going to identify comparative and superlative adjectives, right? And once again, some of the adjectives, they compare people, animals, places, or things. And we have comparative adjectives which compare two people, animals, places, or things, which ends in er. And then we have superlative adjectives, right, which compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, and they end in est, right? And we made an example of adjectives, adjectives that compares or the degrees of comparisons, where we said it is tall, taller, it's where it's a comparative adjective, and then we have tallest, which is a superlative adjective. Because we said comparative adjective ends in er, because this is where you're comparing two people. And then the superlative adjectives, it compares more than two people, places, animals, or thing, and it ends in est. All right, so now we're going to identify comparative and superlative adjectives, right? We need to find the adjective that compares. Oxford is the nicest town of all. We need to identify or find the adjective that compares, right? And then we can also say which adjective it is, whether it is comparative adjective or superlative adjective, right? So we're going to underline the adjective that compares within the sentence. And then we're also going to say if it is a comparative adjective or if it is a superlative adjective. So Oxford is the nicest town of all. All right, so if we identify or find the adjective that compares within the sentence, then we're going to say it is the nicest town of all, which means that Oxford is now being compared to all the other towns, right, within that state or within the, let's say, within that province, right? So nicest. And if we say nicest, then it means that it is being compared to all the other towns, right, or cities or so on, or towns within that city. And then we can say this is a superlative. This is a superlative adjective. Right? So this is superlative adjective and it compares the place, which is Oxford, to basically all the other towns within either that city, that province, that state. So here we have a superlative adjective. And why do we also know it's superlative? It's because it ends in EST. All right. We need to find the adjective that compares. Today is the hottest day so far. Today is the hottest day so far. We need to find the adjective that compare. We're going to underline it, and then we're also going to say whether it is a comparative adjective or whether it is a superlative adjective. All right, so now if we look at the sentence once again, today is the hottest day so far, then we are going to choose, or we're going to select hottest as the adjective that compare, right? Because this is basically saying that it is the hottest day, maybe in the whole week, right? It is summer, and today is just one of those hottest days. Because now you're comparing today or how hot today is to every other summer's day, right? So hottest. And if we identify hottest as being the adjective that compare, then we're going to say it is a superlative adjective. And why do we know this is a superlative adjective? Because it is literally, like I said, being compared to every other hot day that we had so far. But today, it is the hottest, right? So we can say yesterday was hot, the day before was hotter, but today it is just the hottest. And that is a superlative adjective. It is being compared to many other hot days. All right, Canada is colder than Mexico. Canada is colder than Mexico. We now need to find the adjective that compares. So in the sentence, we're going to underline the adjective that compares. And then we are going to say if it is either a comparative adjective or if it is a superlative adjective. Canada is colder than Mexico. We need to choose the adjective that compares within the sentence. All right, so if we choose the adjective that compare, and then we can say it is colder. Canada is colder than Mexico, which means that we are comparing Canada, or let's say the weather, or how cold it is compared to how cold it is in Mexico, right? So it is basically only Canada being compared to Mexico. It is comparing two things, or let's say two places, right? So if we are comparing two places, then it means that this is a comparative. So this is a comparative adjective, right? And a comparative adjective, it compares to people, to animals, to places, or to things, right? So that is a comparative adjective. All right, so now we are moving on. Okay. And remember also a comparative adjective, it ends in ER, whereas a superlative adjective, it ends in EST, right? All right, so now we're going to go to our test where we are going to identify comparative or superlative adjectives, right? So we are once again going to find the adjective that compares within the sentence. Snowy is the whitest goat of all. We need to choose the adjective that compares within that sentence. So is it whitest or is it goat? Whitest or goat? All right, so if we choose the adjective within the sentence that compares, then we are going to say it is whitest, right? Which means that Snowy, the goat, is being compared to all the other goats, right? He is the whitest goat of all, right? So that is a superlative adjective. Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. So Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. We need to choose the correct adjective that compares. Is it homework or is it harder? Is it homework or is it harder? So Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. All right, so if we go over the sentence, Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework, then we can identify the adjective that compares as harder, right? We are comparing Gabby's homework to how hard it is compared to Beth's homework, right? Which means that this is a comparative adjective. So harder, and also it ends in ER. This is the highest hill in Oakland. This is the highest hill in Oakland. Is it highest or is it Oakland? We need to choose the adjective that compares within the sentence. This is the highest hill in Oakland. All right, so now if we were to find or select the adjective that compare within the sentence, then we can say it is highest, right? And highest ends in est, which means that this is a superlative adjective, right? And this hill is now being compared not just to another hill in a different place, but it is basically being compared to every other hill within Oakland, right? So which means that this is the highest hill in Oakland, right? So highest, right? It is a superlative adjective, right? And remember we said superlative adjectives, it compares two or more either people, places, animals, or things, right? And it also ends in EST. T, right? So highest in Oakland. So if you have that, then well done. All right. We need to find the adjective that compares. Blue Point is nicer than Lakewood. So we need to choose the adjective that compare. Is it Blue Point or is it nicer? Right? Which means that Blue Point is now being compared to Lakewood, right? So they're saying that Blue Point is nicer than Lakewood, which means that our adjective that compare will be nicer, right? And also the fact that our adjective that compare ends in er, we can then say that this is a comparative adjective, right? And remember, we said that a comparative adjective, it compares two people, places, animals, or things, right? And it ends in er. And then we have our superlative adjectives that compares more than two people, places, animals, or thing, and it ends in est. So nicer is our adjective that compare. All right. So if you have that, then well done. So now we're going on to the last one, right? And the last one that says, does the adjective compare to or more than to, right? So does the adjective compare to or more than to? Once again, we are going to go over what a comparative adjective is and a superlative adjective. And I know I am repeating myself, but I am mainly repeating myself so that we can familiarize ourselves with what a comparative adjective is compared to what a superlative adjective is, right? And remember, we said some adjectives they compare people, animals, places, or things. And then we have comparative adjectives as well as superlative adjectives, right? Which we have been doing within our lesson today. And a comparative adjective, it compares two people, animals, places, or things. And it ends in er, right? For example, Andy is taller than his sister. And then we have a superlative adjective, right? Which compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, right? And the superlative adjectives, it ends in est. For example, he is the tallest person in class, which means that he is being compared to the rest of the class, right? Not just being compared to one person. All right, so now we need to look at the adjective in bold, right? Does it compare to apples or does it compare more than to apples? The red apple is sweeter than the green apple. So does it compare two apples or does it compare more than two apples? Sweeter, right? So this is now where we are going to have to find out if it is either comparative or a superlative adjective. So the red apple is sweeter than the green apple. All right, so the word or the adjective sweeter, right? The adjective sweeter, it is a comparative adjective, right? And why do we say it's a comparative adjective? It means it is comparing two apples. It is comparing the red apple to the green apple, right? Which they are saying that the red apple it is more sweeter than the green apple, which means that this compares two apples, and we call that a comparative adjective. All right. This is the greatest story of all. This is the greatest story of all. Does it compare two stories or does it compare more than 2 stories, right? And it will also be able to tell us if it is either a comparative adjective or if it is a superlative adjective, right? So this is the greatest story of all, right? Is it comparing 2 stories or more than 2 stories? So if we are saying this is the greatest stories of all, right, then it means that it is basically being compared to more than 2 stories, right? Because they're not saying it is the greatest story than the other story. It is the greatest story of all the other stories, which means that we are now comparing this to more than 2 stories, right? And if we are comparing it to more than 2 stories and our adjective ending in est, then we can say this is a superlative adjective. All right. The next one is Luke's house is colder than my house. So Luke's house is colder than my house, right? So does this compare 2 houses or does it compare more than 2 houses? Luke's house is colder than my house. Are we comparing 2 houses or are we comparing more than 2 houses? All right, so within that sentence, we identified colder, right? So Luke's house is colder than my house. So in this case, we are comparing Luke's house to my house, right? Which means that 2 houses are being compared, right? So 2 houses are being compared, right? And if 2 houses are being compared, then that is a comparative adjective, right? That is only comparing 2 places, right? Which is 2 houses. And it ends also in er. So that is a comparative adjective that compares 2 houses. All right. So now we're going to do our test, right? And with our test, it says you need to look at the adjective in bold. Does it compare 2 pools or does it compare more than 2 pools? Our pool is warmer than Dana's pool. So our pool is warmer than Dana's pool, right? So does it compare 2 pools or does it compare more than 2 pools? Our pool is warmer than Dana's pool. Does it compare 2 pools or more than 2 pools? All right, so within this sentence, right, we can then say that warmer, the word warmer, right, it is comparing the 2 pools, which is our pool and Dana's pool. So we're going to say it's 2 pools, and that is a comparative adjective, right? The kitten is softer than the cat. The kitten is softer than the cat. So the word softer, does it compare to animals or does it compare more than to animals? The kitten is softer than the cat. Does it compare to animals or more than to animals? Softer. All right, so in this case, softer, right, it is saying that the kitten is softer than the cat. So they are comparing two animals, right, which is the kitten and the cat, right, and whoever that is more soft, and that is a comparative adjective. Luke's house is colder than my house. So Luke's house is colder than my house, right? Is comparing 2 houses or more than 2 houses. All right, so within the sentence colder, right, it is comparing Luke's house to my house, right, which means that we are comparing 2 houses and that is a comparative adjective. All right, so that is basically the end of our lesson on adjectives that compare, right? And we compared pictures as well as we identified comparative as well as superlative adjectives, right? And we see the comparative adjective, it compares to people, places, animals, or things, and it ends in er. And then we have a superlative adjective, which basically compares more than two people, places, animals, or things, and it ends in est. Right. All right, grade one. So thank you very much for joining our lesson. I really hope that it was informative, and I hope that you're going to have an amazing evening further. Goodbye.